let's explore this regulatory affairs book for beginners. Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. I'm super excited for this video. I, Patricia, authored a RA Made Easy handbook. It's a beginner's guide to all things pharmaceutical regulatory affairs for beginners, and this is the official review video. So let's get right into it. So let's start with the preface. Okay, so here it talks about the scope, the aim of the book, who it's targeting. So this is obviously for beginners or those who aspire to become regulatory affairs officers or specialists in the pharmaceutical industry. So whether you are a pharmacist or any other professional, you could be a scientist, you could be a pharmacist assistant, you could be literally anything else than a pharmacist, but still in science. You could be an officer in regulatory affairs. But if you are a pharmacist, in addition to that, you have the special privilege of becoming the responsible pharmacist or the authorized representative of the company that liaises with the authority. Okay? So, it talks about the scope. I mean, this book is not only for the pharmaceutical industry in South Africa, it really gives you a global look. It talks about regulatory authorities around the world, agencies. It talks about what regulatory affairs really is, importing medicines, pharmacovigilance of medicines. And if you're looking to expand your horizon, or just if you're curious about the topic and you just want to give yourself that little additional structured approach and entry into the sector, then this is a great book. Okay, and then it outlines the chapters. So we have chapter 1 is the introduction to regulatory affairs. Chapter 2 is the key global regulatory players. Chapter 3 is drug development and drug regulatory procedures. Then chapter 4 is Africa and the African Medicines Agency, so in relation to regulations. Chapter 5 talks about SAHPRA specifically and its regulatory activities. Chapter 6 talks about regulatory systems and networks. Chapter 7 talks about pharmaceutical compliance standards. Chapter 8 is the regulatory dossier, the ECTD format. Chapter 9 is pharmacovigilance. And chapter 10 is building a career in regulatory affairs. Like, it's a little bit of a cheat code for beginners. And then it closes with chapter 11 with closing remarks, which is just a tiny conclusion. All right, so chapter 1. Introduction to regulatory affairs. So here we get some definitions. We have a framework for legal, administrative, and technical measures, of which regulations have the component. We have some acts that came into effect and that regulate the industry, the Medicines and Related Substance Act, the Pharmacy Act. So this pertains to the South African context. We have a regulatory bodies overview talking about various global organizations. We have the FDA, the EMA, and the others, PICS and the rest that we talk about. And then we talk about country-specific agencies around the world, giving about 10 examples. And then it goes into key regulatory functions and objectives. So what do regulators actually do? What do these authorities do? Okay, what is compliance? And then it ends the chapter with a little next step. So what next from this introduction? What are you about to see? So in the next chapter, we're going to see the regulatory giants and their global impact. And then the chapter ends with a little summary here with a checklist where you can write in your own notes. So I love this part. You have a reflective notes section. You have lines to write what key factors or key insight you've gained and what your highlights were for this chapter. And then it goes on to chapter 2. So chapter 2 is key regulatory authorities around the world, key players. And then it gives you an overview of those. And then it talks about their role, each one in depth, how they're structured, some of their committees, why and what they do and why they do it. It talks about, it gives you a tip here. And then it talks about all the other regulators. It talks about those who are in the application process to becoming members of PICS and PICS, its applicants and stuff. Then it goes to similarities between these regulatory authorities. So what do they all have in common around the world? And then what do they have different? So key differences are also outlined here. And then it tells you about the differences and goes on until here we get into regulatory approach to personalized medicine and biologics. Talks about that, talks about navigating global regulatory challenges. And then the chapter ends on a next step note. Again, it tells you what to look forward in the next chapter. And you have this summary checklist again, which I love. You can write notes, you can revisit some concepts and just highlight what you learned. And then it goes to chapter 3, drug regulatory developments and regulatory procedures. So here, this is pharmaceutical development basically, but it tells you about all the procedures around the world that you can encounter when trying to register a product or to develop a product, whether new or whether a generic or already existing entity, multi-source, NCE. And then it goes through the developmental processes of how to develop a medicine. So all the stages, pre and post clinical, R&D, all of that. So you have an idea of what the stages are of regulation, basically. And then it summarizes them in a table form with the durations of each, so you know how long it takes to actually go through each of these regulatory steps. And then it details the procedures for all of the regulatory authorities mentioned on how long they take to do some of their product registrations. So it talks about all of that, different agencies around the world, how long they take, what different processes they have for different types of medicine registration. And then it goes to a case study. So there's a case study here to navigate approvals. And the first case is about South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. How would you go about registering a medicine? And then it talks about a second scenario with Kenya and Nigeria. And then it goes to market authorization, what those are and how to approach them. Then there's a tabulated summary here of market authorization holders and the corresponding, like the global and then the local aspects, because in South Africa it's a little different. And then we speak on variations, renewals, and label updates. And the chapter closes again with a next step on what to expect in the next chapter. And then you have a summary chapter checklist again to make some notes. So in chapter 4, we talk about Africa and the AMA, African Medicines Agency, which is really in the process of gearing up on many new pathways for medicine registration and evaluation. It talks about Africa, all the various regions and regional regulatory regions in Africa, and what they're each composed of. The new ones and upcoming ones, the Zazibana pilot, ECOWAS and CEMAC and AMA, talks about all the various members and their various or their differing engagements or participation in their region, and the role of the WHO in African regulations. Talks about the maturity levels and how they inspect and benchmark all of these regulatory bodies. And then some evolving roles of AMA in Africa for current and for the future. It talks about the NEPAD, the AUDA Agenda 2063, which is to develop Africa and its regulatory bodies in a specific way. And then you have case study answers from the first case study questions. And the chapter ends and you get your summary checklist again. Then we go to chapter 5 with SAHPRA and its regulatory activities. So what does SAHPRA do? Health product registration, the types of categories, the types of medicine registrations that SAHPRA has, its timelines, its dates, its types of submission pathways, its pre-reg and post-reg options or amendments. It talks about regulatory submissions. And then this is for medicines, and then it also talks about medical devices, including IVDs, SAHPRA submission evaluation and outcomes, so how their outcomes are made. By the way, I used to be an evaluator for SAHPRA, so that was fun. But yeah, how the evaluations and outcomes come about. And it talks about all the alignment that SAHPRA does with other bodies and regulators, those it aligns with, the recognition pathways, recognized authorities, and all that. And then its own pathways of submission currently available. And remember, the new ECTD website is expanding on the types of applications that it's going to be able to take, so that's good. So beyond the ones spoken of here, there are more coming right up. So then it talks about regulatory inspections and audits. Again, what SAHPRA does, their role, GMP inspectors, what they do. And the chapter then ends on the next step. So what to expect in the next chapter. We're going to look at systems and networks. So again, the chapter ends with this reflective notes. You can write whatever you've learned or key highlights or concepts. And then it goes to chapter 6, regulatory systems and networks. Here we discuss systems, that are used in regulations, various electronic systems, manual systems, networks, and then the future of the future trends, like with AI, and some challenges. And again, the chapter closes with what to expect in the next one. And you have your summary checklist. Chapter 7 talks about pharmaceutical compliance standards. So here you get to understand all the good practices. Talks about GMP, good regulatory practice, GRP, good documentation practice, GDP, good pharmacovigilance practice, GVP, good clinical practice, GCP, and how they all fit, good lab practice, GLP, and then it summarizes it in this nice, neat chapter table for you. And it talks about all of that and more. Talks about counterfeit medicines, talks about non-compliance and what could happen, and then a summary conclusion and checklist. Then we go to chapter 8, the regulatory dossier. So here it outlines what an actual dossier is, what its structure is, its content, module by module, what to expect, and what the next chapter is for the book. A summary checklist, and then we're in pharmacovigilance. Pharmacovigilance, it goes through life cycle management, post-market surveillance. It talks about ADRs, adverse drug events, and IFEs, and how to report those, and some of the risks, identification and minimization strategies. And then the chapter closes on the next steps and the checklist. Then we go to the cheat code, chapter 10, on building a career. So how do you even begin? What to look at, what to do, some recommendations, some training, some approach on volunteering, some career pathways and roles, where you could work in regulatory affairs, what kind of environments there are. It outlines 10 specific different subsectors within RA, and then how to network with professionals, how to approach them, and like a 10-step cheat code on exactly what to do for the next 12 months. So the chapter ends on a conclusion, and then in the closing remarks, it just wraps everything up, tells you what you should have gotten out of the book in conclusion, the main points, and really just giving you hope on how to go forward from here, what to do next. And then there's a glossary at the end for all the keywords and the abbreviations, if there are any that were used and that you're not familiar with, because obviously, like I say, in all the introductory courses, there's a lot of lingo that goes on in regulatory affairs. And when people talk about abbreviations and they like say things like, oh, the EMA, or the BMR, or the CEP, and all these words, you can get lost really quickly. So it's good to learn the lingo, and that kind of gives you an in into the sector. And then we have references at the back, and some websites to go follow or to go and peruse. And that's the end of the book. Okay, so my thoughts on this book are obviously good. I mean, I recommend it to all new enthusiasts and learners and aspiring regulators. What I will say, though, is that while writing this book, a lot more information came up. And so best believe a second edition is already in the pipeline for a part 2. There's so much information. Even on the LinkedIn, we mentioned a few weeks ago how the main chapters or the main topics to understand when getting into RA, there were about 20 or so and this book has about 15 of them. So there's an extra 5 that haven't been addressed. And that's what we're going to include and piggyback off of in the second edition. So stay tuned for that because it is coming soon. The new enrollments and the new intakes for ROP, the RA Work Placement Program, are gonna have this embedded in their 12 months learning. So the second edition is gonna really be structured towards the annual work placement to give you guys support and structure as you navigate this internship for regulatory affairs. And the book is going to be the perfect guide for that. So the second edition is going to be restructured and amplified to really take you through all of those 20 topics in a structured way, month per month, for help also with the 1 year work placement. So super exciting, guys. Oh my gosh, I'm excited. I don't know about you, but I'm really excited. So that should be coming, let's say in, this first one had a delay, so I don't want to be overly optimistic again. Meanwhile, half of it is not in my hands. Guys, if you know publishing, if you know editing, it goes south really quickly. And in this case, it did. So let me just say like August, around August-ish. But take that with a pinch of salt because timelines shift quickly. But obviously, keep watching our social medias. You will get updated when the second edition is ready. If you are enrolling for ROP in the meantime, go ahead because, you still get your 1 year experience regardless. But what's going to be extra special in the new enrollments in the second half of the year will be the addition of the new edition as well as more structured, the extra 5 topics. So stay tuned. It will be more expensive too. So, people always think, okay, I'm going to wait on the other one. And then when they hear the price, they're like, but yeah, guys, more value, more costs. That's just how life works. So it's up to you how you do it. We're also going to introduce a 6 months placement to do a half-year mark for some people, and then a 2-year placement because some of these regulatory affairs positions are really stretching it. So if you want to do 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years, it's gonna be a possibility. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned. Contact us at the email address below if you're interested, and we'll see you soon. Bye.